Ladies and gentlemen, today I want to talk to you about something profoundly serious, something that affects your life, your relationships, and even the very structure of society. Bad people exist. They are real, and their influence is corrosive. They thrive in deception, destruction, and irresponsibility. And if you do not learn to recognize them, you may fall victim to their influence, or worse, become one of them. Now, what defines a bad person? We are not speaking about someone who simply makes mistakes. We are all fallible. We all have our shortcomings. But there are those among us who choose the path of malevolence, who knowingly deceive, manipulate, and corrupt. And they often display the same 8 dangerous signs. Understanding malevolence is not just an intellectual exercise. It is a matter of survival. If you fail to recognize the presence of truly bad people, you leave yourself vulnerable to their influence, their manipulation, and ultimately their destruction. It is a grave mistake to assume that everyone around you operates with good intentions. Human nature is not inherently good, nor is it inherently evil. It is complex, capable of both creation and destruction, of both compassion and cruelty. But there are those among us who have made a choice, whether consciously or unconsciously, to engage in behavior that is not just selfish, but actively harmful. These people do not merely err in judgment or stumble as we all do. They cultivate deceit. They harbor resentment. They seek to undermine, to control, and to destroy. Recognizing them is not just about protecting yourself. It is about ensuring that you do not become one of them. The first step in this recognition is to understand that malevolence is not always obvious. It does not announce itself. It does not come bearing a sign that reads, "I intend to harm you." It hides itself in charm, in persuasion, in the subtle twisting of words and emotions. A truly dangerous person is often quite likable at first. They may be charismatic, engaging, even seemingly kind. But beneath that facade lies something darker. They do not operate from a place of genuine care or honesty. They operate with a strategy, a plan, whether they are fully aware of it or not, to exploit, to deceive, and to control. One of the greatest dangers of malevolent individuals is their ability to distort reality. They are experts in manipulation, and their primary weapon is deception. They lie not in the small, inconsequential ways that all people do at times, but in a way that is calculated. Their lies are not just about avoiding consequences. They are about altering the world around them, bending it to their will. They make you question your own perceptions. They rewrite history, shifting blame onto others while absolving themselves of responsibility. They craft narratives that place them at the center, often as the victim, even when they are the ones causing harm. And the more you allow yourself to believe these distortions, the more you fall under their influence. The damage caused by such people is not just external, it is psychological. They create confusion, they instill doubt, they make you question your own worth, your own judgment, your own understanding of right and wrong. They exploit empathy, using it as a tool to manipulate those who would otherwise resist them. If you are a person who seeks to help, who desires to see the good in others, then you are precisely the kind of person they prey upon. And they do this not by force, but by persuasion, by slowly eroding your ability to see them for what they truly are. Perhaps the most insidious aspect of malevolence is its ability to spread. Bad people do not just seek power over individuals. They seek power over systems, over structures, over society itself. They corrupt institutions. They erode trust. They create chaos. And within that chaos, they thrive. And if they cannot directly influence an entire system, they will seek to influence the people within it. They plant ideas, poisonous, destructive ideas that take root in the minds of those who are vulnerable. They turn people against one another, fostering division where there should be unity, resentment where there should be cooperation. The ability to recognize these patterns is not just about self-defense, it is about responsibility. Because the moment you see malevolence for what it is, you have a choice. You can turn a blind eye, pretend it does not exist, tell yourself that it is not your problem. But in doing so, you allow it to grow, you allow it to spread, and eventually it will come for you, for your family, for your community. The alternative is to confront it, to refuse to be deceived, to refuse to be manipulated, to refuse to participate in the lies and corruption. This is not an easy path. It requires vigilance, it requires courage, it requires an unshakable commitment to truth, even when that truth is uncomfortable. Because the reality is that malevolence does not disappear when ignored. It festers, it thrives in darkness, in passivity, in the silence of those who should have spoken up. And so the only way to combat it is with strength, moral strength, intellectual strength, and the willingness to face the world as it is rather than as we wish it to be. But strength is not enough on its own. You must also cultivate discernment. You must learn to distinguish between genuine kindness and calculated deception, between honest mistakes and deliberate malevolence. This is no simple task. It requires experience, wisdom, and a deep understanding of human nature. But it begins with a simple truth. Bad people exist, and they do not always look like villains. Sometimes they look like friends, sometimes they look like leaders, sometimes they look like the very people you trust the most. And so the question is not whether or not you will encounter such people. You will. The question is whether you will recognize them when you do, whether you will have the strength to walk away, whether you will have the courage to stand against them, and whether you will hold yourself to a higher standard, refusing to engage in the very behaviors that make them what they are. Because the greatest tragedy of malevolence is not just the harm it causes, but the way it spreads. And the only way to stop it is to refuse to be a part of it, to refuse to lie, to refuse to manipulate, to refuse to engage in the resentment and destruction that define bad people, to stand for truth, to stand for responsibility, to stand for what is good, even when it is difficult. Because in the end, the world does not suffer from the existence of bad people alone. It suffers from the silence of those who know better but choose to do nothing. Deception and manipulation are the primary tools of those who seek power and control over others. They are not interested in cooperation, mutual growth, or honest engagement. Instead, they thrive in distortion, in bending reality to fit their selfish interests. To manipulate is to take control without consent, to subtly or overtly alter another person's perception in a way that benefits the manipulator while harming or disadvantaging the manipulated. This is not mere persuasion or influence. Manipulation operates in the shadows, exploiting human nature, preying on emotion, and twisting facts to create an alternate reality. And those who use manipulation as a way of life are among the most dangerous people you will ever encounter. At the heart of manipulation lies deception. Manipulative individuals do not tell outright obvious lies, not at first. Instead, they weave half-truths, omitting key information, exaggerating details, or framing events in ways that distort reality. The goal is not to present facts as they are, but to shape the narrative to serve their personal agenda. This is how they gain control over people, organizations, and even entire societies. They manufacture doubt, making their victims question their own judgment, their own memories, and their own perceptions. When someone manipulates you effectively, you do not even realize it is happening because the very nature of manipulation is to remain unseen. One of the most common forms of manipulation is gaslighting. This is when a person systematically makes you question your own reality by denying what you have seen, heard, or experienced. If you catch them in a lie, they will tell you that you misunderstood. If you remember an event one way, they will insist it happened differently. Over time, this tactic erodes your confidence in your own perceptions. You begin to doubt your instincts, your emotions, and even your sanity. A skilled manipulator will make you feel as though you are the problem, as though you are imagining things, as though you are overreacting. And once they have convinced you of that, they can control you completely. Manipulative people are masters of emotional exploitation. They understand human psychology well enough to know exactly which buttons to press. They play on guilt, using it as a weapon to get what they want. They will make you feel selfish for setting boundaries, unkind for saying no, and ungrateful for questioning their behavior. They will use your sense of duty against you, framing their demands as reasonable expectations, making you feel as though you owe them something. And if you resist, they will find a way to turn the situation against you, making themselves the victim and you the villain. Another key tactic of manipulation is creating a false sense of dependency. A manipulative person wants you to feel as though you need them, that without their guidance, their approval, or their support, you would be lost. They do this by isolating you from others, subtly discouraging relationships that could offer you an outside perspective. They frame themselves as the only person who truly understands you, the only one who has your best interests at heart. This isolates you, weakening your ability to resist their influence. And once you believe that you cannot function without them, they have complete control. Manipulation is not always direct. Sometimes it operates through triangulation, pitting people against one another to maintain control over both parties. A manipulator will spread misinformation, telling one person one version of a story while presenting another version to someone else. They create division, mistrust, and conflict, ensuring that people remain too distracted fighting each other to recognize who is truly pulling the strings. This tactic is common in toxic workplaces, dysfunctional families, and even political systems. It keeps people weak, confused, and easily controlled. Perhaps the most sinister aspect of manipulation is that it is often disguised as kindness. A manipulative person may present themselves as caring, supportive, and well-intentioned. They may offer help, advice, and encouragement, not because they truly want what is best for you, but because they want to create a sense of obligation. This is what is known as covert manipulation. It does not look like manipulation on the surface, but the underlying intention is control. They make you feel indebted to them, subtly reinforcing the idea that you owe them loyalty, obedience, or favors. And once you accept that unspoken contract, they will use it against you, reminding you of everything they have done for you whenever you try to assert your independence. The worst part is that manipulation can be incredibly effective. It works because it exploits natural human tendencies, our desire for connection, our need for validation, and our tendency to trust those we care about. But once you become aware of these tactics, you can begin to resist them. The first step is to recognize when someone is trying to alter your perception for their own benefit. If you constantly feel confused, guilty, or doubting yourself in someone's presence, you must stop and ask yourself why. Manipulation thrives in ambiguity. Clarity is its enemy. Seek the truth, verify facts, and trust your instincts. Second, set firm boundaries. A manipulative person will always push past whatever limits you set, testing how much they can get away with. The moment you notice this pattern, take it as a sign that you need to distance yourself. Do not engage in endless debates with them, trying to get them to see your perspective. They already see it. They just do not care. You do not need to justify yourself to a person whose entire goal is to make you feel uncertain. You simply need to say no and walk away. Third, surround yourself with people who encourage independence and critical thinking. One of the biggest weapons against manipulation is the presence of honest, supportive relationships. When you have multiple perspectives to compare, it becomes much harder for a manipulator to distort reality. Seek people who value honesty over flattery, who challenge your thinking rather than blindly agreeing with you, and who respect your autonomy rather than trying to control your choices. Ultimately, manipulation is about control, and the antidote to control is self-awareness, critical thinking, and the willingness to stand up for yourself. No one has the right to dictate your thoughts, your emotions, or your decisions. The moment you recognize someone attempting to do so, you must make a choice. Will you allow yourself to be controlled, or will you take back your power? Because in the end, the greatest defense against manipulation is not just seeing through the lies, it is refusing to participate in them. Resentment and envy are among the most corrosive emotions a person can harbor. They do not just poison the individual who holds them, they radiate outward, infecting relationships, communities, and even entire societies. These emotions are not just passive feelings of discontent, they are active forces of destruction. They lead people to tear down what others have built, to sabotage those who succeed, and to reject personal responsibility for their own failures. A resentful person does not seek to improve themselves. They seek to bring everyone else down to their level. And when this mindset takes hold, it is capable of immense harm. Resentment begins with comparison. When people measure themselves against others and find themselves lacking, they experience a deep and uncomfortable dissatisfaction. But instead of using that dissatisfaction as motivation to improve, they take the easier path, the path of blame. They tell themselves that the success of others is unfair, that life is rigged against them, that they have been robbed of what they deserve. They begin to see those who have achieved more, worked harder, or displayed greater discipline not as inspirations, but as enemies. This is the first step toward malevolence. A resentful person does not seek truth. They seek justification. They look for any reason to confirm their belief that they have been wronged, that the world is against them, that their failures are not their fault. And once this belief takes hold, it fuels a dangerous cycle. Instead of taking action to improve their own circumstances, they focus their energy on criticizing, undermining, and resenting those who have succeeded. They become obsessed with proving that successful people do not deserve what they have. They mock their efforts, belittle their achievements, and look for flaws to exploit. If they can find no real flaws, they will invent them. They will distort the truth, spread rumors, and twist narratives, all in an attempt to tear down what they are unwilling to build themselves. Envy is a close companion to resentment. It is not merely the desire for what someone else has, it is the desire to see them lose it. A person consumed by envy does not just want success, they want others to fail. They cannot celebrate the achievements of others because those achievements serve as painful reminders of their own shortcomings. And instead of facing those shortcomings honestly, they choose to lash out. They attempt to diminish the value of what others have earned, to downplay their talent, to dismiss their hard work as mere luck or privilege. A particularly insidious aspect of envy is that it often masquerades as virtue. People will claim that their resentment toward the successful is based on principles, that they are standing against injustice, against inequality, against corruption. And while real injustice does exist, a person ruled by envy is not interested in justice. They are not looking to make the world better. They are looking to justify their bitterness. They disguise their jealousy as moral outrage, convincing themselves that their hatred is righteous. And in doing so, they allow their resentment to fester, unchecked and unchallenged. This resentment does not stay confined to the mind of the individual. It spreads. It seeks validation. A resentful person does not want to suffer alone. They want others to join them. They look for people who will confirm their beliefs, who will echo their grievances, who will feed the flames of their bitterness. They form groups, movements, entire ideologies built on resentment, encouraging others to blame, to hate, to destroy. And in doing so, they create a collective force of destruction capable of immense damage. The effects of this mindset are catastrophic. When resentment and envy dominate a person's thinking, they cease to be productive. They stop creating. They stop improving. They stop striving for greatness because greatness requires effort, and effort requires humility, the humility to admit that one is not yet where they need to be. But a resentful person does not want to admit that. They want the rewards of success without the discipline, without the sacrifice, without the struggle. And when they realize they cannot have those rewards, they turn to their only remaining option, destruction. Instead of working toward personal excellence, they try to erase excellence wherever they see it. They advocate for mediocrity, claiming that standards are oppressive. They ridicule ambition, labeling it as greed or selfishness. They attack traditions, institutions, and values that have stood the test of time simply because they see them as symbols of the success they themselves could not achieve. They do not seek to build, they seek to dismantle. And when they succeed in this, they are left with nothing but ruins. But the truth is, resentment does not have to consume a person. It is possible to feel envy, to feel dissatisfaction, to feel a sense of injustice, and to channel those emotions into something constructive. The difference between a destructive person and a person of strength lies in how they respond to these emotions. A strong person acknowledges their envy, but does not let it turn to hatred. They recognize their resentment, but use it as motivation to improve. They do not waste time attacking those who have achieved more. They learn from them. They study their habits, their discipline, their strategies, and they apply those lessons to their own lives. This is the only way to escape the trap of resentment. It requires honesty, the willingness to admit one's own shortcomings without making excuses. It requires discipline, the strength to put in the necessary work instead of seeking shortcuts, and it requires humility. The understanding that success is not handed out unfairly, but earned through sacrifice and perseverance. No one is immune to these feelings. Everyone at some point experiences envy, resentment, and bitterness. But the key is to recognize these emotions for what they are: warning signs. They indicate that something in your life is out of alignment, that you are not living up to your potential, that you are avoiding responsibility, that you are allowing yourself to be controlled by negativity rather than striving for greatness. The solution is not to tear others down, it is to lift yourself up. Because the world does not need more resentment. It does not need more people consumed by bitterness, more voices calling for destruction, more minds trapped in a cycle of blame. What the world needs is people who rise above these emotions, who take responsibility for their own lives, who commit themselves to excellence rather than envy. That is the only path forward. That is the only way to build rather than destroy. That is the only way to transform resentment into something powerful, something that fuels greatness rather than prevents it. A lack of personal responsibility is one of the clearest and most dangerous signs of a bad person. It is not just an individual flaw, it is a worldview, a fundamental rejection of the very principle that gives life structure, meaning, and stability. Those who refuse to take responsibility for their actions, their choices, and their circumstances create chaos in their own lives and in the lives of everyone around them. They blame others, they make excuses, and they distort reality to avoid facing the consequences of their behavior. And when this pattern is left unchecked, it leads to destruction of relationships, of institutions, and of entire societies. Personal responsibility is the foundation of integrity. It is the ability to acknowledge one's mistakes, to accept the consequences of one's actions, and to actively work toward improvement. Without it, a person becomes unreliable, dishonest, and ultimately dangerous. The refusal to take responsibility manifests in many ways: constant excuses, endless justifications, shifting blame onto others, and an unwillingness to learn or grow. A person who never takes responsibility is a person who never truly learns, because to learn is to first admit ignorance or error. And if one refuses to acknowledge error, they remain trapped in the same destructive patterns indefinitely. One of the most common tactics of those who reject responsibility is blame shifting. They will attribute their failures to external circumstances, to bad luck, to unfair treatment, or to the actions of others. If they are unsuccessful, it is because society is against them. If they are caught in a lie, it is because they were misunderstood. If their relationships fall apart, it is because other people were too demanding, too unreasonable, too flawed. This is not just dishonesty. It is a fundamental refusal to engage with reality. And the more a person does this, the further they drift from truth, from growth, and from any possibility of self-improvement. But the problem goes even deeper than that. When someone refuses to take responsibility, they do not just deceive others, they deceive themselves. They construct a version of reality in which they are always the victim, never the perpetrator, always innocent, never accountable. And once they have fully embraced this mindset, they become incapable of genuine change. After all, why would they change if everything is someone else's fault? Why would they strive for improvement if their problems are always external? This is why a person who refuses responsibility remains stagnant. They repeat the same mistakes over and over, blaming everyone but themselves for the predictable consequences of their own actions. Such people often manipulate those around them into carrying their burdens for them. They rely on others to clean up their messes, to cover for their mistakes, to bear the weight of responsibilities they themselves should be handling. And the people around them, out of kindness, out of obligation, or out of a misguided sense of loyalty, often comply. But this only enables the behavior, reinforcing the belief that they can avoid responsibility indefinitely. The truth, however, is that responsibility cannot be avoided forever. Eventually, reality asserts itself. The weight of neglected obligations, of unaddressed failures, of denied truths, all comes crashing down. And when that happens, the damage is immense, not only for the person in question, but for everyone who is being drawn into their orbit. A society that encourages irresponsibility is a society on the path to collapse. When individuals refuse to be accountable for their actions, institutions crumble, families break apart, communities dissolve into distrust and dysfunction. The social contract depends on responsibility, on the idea that each person will uphold their obligations, fulfill their duties, and accept the consequences of their behavior. When that principle is abandoned, chaos follows. Laws become meaningless when people refuse to acknowledge guilt. Relationships become impossible when people refuse to admit fault. Progress halts when no one is willing to correct their own shortcomings. The antidote to this is personal accountability. It is the willingness to look in the mirror and ask, what have I done wrong? What can I do better? It is the rejection of victimhood as an identity and the embrace of personal agency. This is not easy. It is far easier to make excuses, to blame others, to avoid discomfort. But the easy path is the path of weakness, of stagnation, and ultimately of failure. Growth requires struggle. It requires discomfort. It requires the courage to confront one's own flaws, to accept one's own failures, and to take deliberate action to correct them. A responsible person does not wallow in self-pity. They do not look for scapegoats. They do not expect others to solve their problems for them. Instead, they take ownership of their lives. They recognize that while not everything that happens to them is their fault, it is still their responsibility to respond to it in a way that is productive and meaningful. They refuse to let past hardships define them. They refuse to let circumstances dictate their character. They refuse to live as passive recipients of fate, choosing instead to actively shape their own destiny. And in doing so, they become strong, they become reliable, they become the kind of person others can trust, respect, and depend on. A responsible person builds rather than destroys. They create stability rather than chaos. They inspire others to rise to the same standard, to reject victimhood, and to take control of their own lives. But for those who reject responsibility, the future is bleak. They may find temporary comfort in excuses, in self-deception, in the illusion that they are free from accountability. But reality does not care about excuses. Sooner or later, the truth catches up. Their relationships suffer, their careers stagnate, their reputations crumble. And the worst part is, they will still refuse to see the connection between their actions and their outcomes. They will continue blaming others, continue searching for reasons why the world is unfair, continue avoiding the one truth they most desperately need to accept, that their life is in their hands and only they can change it. Ultimately, responsibility is not just a burden, it is a privilege. It is the foundation of meaning, of purpose, of strength. Those who embrace it build lives of value. Those who reject it fall into bitterness, weakness, and self-destruction. The choice is clear. Either take responsibility for your life or allow yourself to be swept away by the consequences of your own inaction. There is no middle ground. A pattern of dishonesty is one of the most telling signs of a bad person. Lying is not merely an occasional moral failing or a moment of weakness. It is a habit that, when deeply ingrained, distorts reality and corrupts the very fabric of a person's character. A person who lies constantly is not just deceiving others, they are deceiving themselves. And over time, they lose touch with truth altogether, constructing an artificial world in which their own falsehoods dictate the narrative. This is not just a problem of morality, it is a problem of functionality. A person who does not tell the truth cannot be trusted, cannot build meaningful relationships, and cannot truly improve themselves. Lying is seductive. It offers an immediate escape from difficult situations. It provides a way to avoid consequences, to manipulate perceptions, to evade responsibility. And for those who make dishonesty a way of life, it becomes second nature. They do not just lie to others, they lie to themselves. They rewrite history to suit their needs, alter their own memories to justify their actions, and eventually lose the ability to distinguish between what is real and what is fabricated. The worst liars are not those who tell deliberate falsehoods, but those who have convinced themselves that their lies are the truth. A dishonest person operates on deception, and deception is fundamentally about control. A liar wants to control how others see them, how others interpret reality, and how others react to situations. They manipulate information to serve their own interests, presenting partial truths, exaggerated claims, or outright fabrications to shape the world according to their desires. They are not interested in fairness, in accuracy, or in objectivity. They are interested in getting what they want, whether that be admiration, power, or a means of avoiding consequences. One of the most dangerous forms of dishonesty is pathological lying. The compulsive need to fabricate stories even when there is no obvious benefit. This is not mere exaggeration or the occasional bending of facts. This is lying for the sake of lying. A person who engages in this behavior does so because they have built their entire identity on falsehoods. They cannot tolerate the reality of who they actually are, so they construct an alternate version of themselves, one that is more successful, more admired, more powerful. But this version of themselves is a house of cards. Eventually it collapses, leaving nothing but a trail of broken relationships, shattered trust, and self-inflicted ruin. Lying erodes trust, and trust is the foundation of all human relationships. Without trust, friendships disintegrate, businesses fail, and families fall apart. A dishonest person cannot maintain long-term relationships because inevitably their lies catch up to them. And when they do, the people around them realize that nothing they were told can be believed, that every interaction may have been built on falsehoods, that the person they thought they knew was merely a facade. The realization that someone close to you has been lying is profoundly damaging. It forces you to question your own judgment, to reevaluate your past interactions, to wonder how much of what you believed was ever real. Moreover, dishonesty is not just a social problem, it is a personal one. A person who lies repeatedly begins to corrode their own psyche. When you lie, you create a gap between yourself and reality. And the more you lie, the larger that gap becomes. Eventually, you lose your grip on what is real altogether. You start believing your own fabrications, living in a world that exists only in your mind. This is a dangerous state to be in because reality always asserts itself eventually. No matter how much you lie, the truth remains what it is. And when the illusion collapses, the consequences are severe. A dishonest person often underestimates the long-term damage their lies will cause. They believe that if they are clever enough, they can maintain control, keep their stories straight, and manipulate others indefinitely. But deception is exhausting. It requires constant maintenance. Every lie must be protected by another lie, every omission covered by further deception. It is a precarious balancing act, and eventually something will slip. When it does, the entire structure comes crashing down. The antidote to dishonesty is truth, and truth is not merely the absence of lies, it is a fundamental orientation toward reality. To live truthfully is to accept reality as it is, not as we wish it to be. It requires courage because the truth is often painful. It forces us to confront our own flaws, to acknowledge our mistakes, to take responsibility for our actions. But it is the only path to genuine integrity, to real relationships, and to lasting success. A truthful person does not seek to manipulate others. They do not bend reality to suit their needs. Instead, they build their lives on a foundation of honesty, knowing that trust is earned through consistency and reliability. They do not say what is convenient in the moment. They say what is necessary, what is real, what is aligned with the facts. And because of this, they gain the respect of those around them. People may not always like what a truthful person has to say, but they will know that when they speak, they mean what they say. Living honestly requires discipline. It means resisting the temptation to tell a convenient lie when the truth is uncomfortable. It means being willing to admit fault, even when doing so feels humiliating. It means refusing to manipulate others for personal gain, even when deception would make things easier. But this discipline pays off because an honest person does not have to live in fear of being exposed. They do not have to keep track of an endless web of lies. They do not have to worry about the inevitable moment when their fabrications collapse. They live with integrity, and because of this, they can move through the world with confidence. A person who lies habitually is a person who cannot be trusted. And a person who cannot be trusted is a person who will eventually be abandoned. Dishonesty isolates. It destroys the bonds that hold people together. It leads to failure, to disgrace, to regret. The person who lies to avoid consequences may succeed in the short term, but in the long run, they will face consequences far worse than what they originally feared. The world does not function without truth, and those who attempt to live outside of truth will always, in the end, pay the price. The path of deception, resentment, irresponsibility, and destruction is one that leads only to suffering, both for the individual who walks it and for everyone caught in their wake. Bad people exhibit these signs not merely because of weakness, but because of a fundamental rejection of responsibility, truth, and self-improvement. They blame others for their failures, envy those who succeed, manipulate reality to serve their interests, and refuse to acknowledge their own role in the chaos they create. Such people do not build, they destroy. They do not elevate others, they drag them down. They do not take responsibility, they shift blame and evade consequences. But there is a way forward, a way out of this darkness. It begins with honesty, brutal, unrelenting honesty with oneself. It requires the courage to face one's own flaws, the discipline to take responsibility, and the wisdom to reject resentment in favor of self-improvement. The world does not need more bitterness, more lies, or more destruction. It needs individuals willing to stand for truth, to hold themselves accountable, and to strive for greatness rather than seek to tear others down. Every person has a choice to follow the path of deception, envy, and destruction, or to take the harder but infinitely more rewarding road of responsibility, truth, and personal growth. The first path leads to misery, isolation, and failure. The second leads to strength, integrity, and a life of meaning. The decision is yours. Choose wisely.